Afterwards, people can listen back to it. Okay. Right. So today we're going to talk about language change and indeed about the history of languages. Because by comparing languages, we can find out a lot about what languages used to be like. And this gives us a lot of information that is going to be useful both for understanding the languages today and for rebuilding languages when we need to do language revitalization. Okay, so language change is a constant. That means it is happening all the time. It's a feature in all languages and at all times in history. If we go back and look at records for written languages that have existed for a long time, we will see a lot of changes. But sometimes these changes happen faster at some time than others, and sometimes they happen faster in some communities than others. This is something that we could look into and research more. And sometimes we can see how the languages change by comparing two similar languages. So I've put up here two words which many of the people listening will know: the Assamese word sondro, moon, and the Hindi word, which I believe is pronounced chand, which is also moon. Now, these two words have a single, similar, original form. And one of the differences that we can see is that in the Assamese form, the sound which is ch in Hindi has become s, or corresponds to s. And in fact, there's many other words where you have this correspondence between a ch sound in Hindi and a s sound in Assamese. So, and then the suggestion is that long back in the history of these two languages, there was a common language which had a single form for this word. And because we have records of the Sanskrit language, we can actually see what that common language was like, where they pronounced the word something like Chandra, I believe. Okay, so what kinds of aspects of language change? Well, you can have change in the sounds and the sound systems. This is what we just saw with the comparison of the Assamese sondro and the Hindi chand. You can have change in the meaningful elements of the language, the morphology, the parts that go on the ends of words. So as many of you will know, Assamese is a language related to Sanskrit, but it does not have the same grammatical system as Sanskrit. There can be changes in the way that words and meaningful elements are arranged, which we call syntax, and in the way that meaning is interpreted. But today, I've really only got time to talk about sound change, because sound change is an important feature here. But just by way of a brief digression, here's an example of an English word which has changed its meaning over time. So the Latin word nescire, meaning not to know, led to another Latin word nescius, meaning ignorant. And via Old French, this word comes into English and becomes nice. Today, nice means something like good and kind. But in Middle English, 500 years ago, it meant stupid, because it comes from the word meaning not knowing or ignorant. But another early sense was to be reserved. So ignorant was associated with the idea of being reserved or shy, and then came to mean fastidious or scrupulous. And this led eventually to the sense of fine or subtle. And so you can see that over time, the same linguistic form may change in its meaning. Okay, so how does this historical study of language work? Before I start to talk about the situation of Tai Ahom, which will be the main aspect of today. So here we have a group of words in a range of languages: English, West Frisian, which is spoken on some islands off the coast of Holland, Dutch, German, Icelandic, and Danish. And we can see immediately that there are relationships between all of these words. So all the words for apple start with something like an a sound. The symbol in Danish stands for a. The German word is pronounced, of these languages, I really only know German and English. The German word is pronounced Apfel, and the English is apple. So they are different, but you can see there is a relationship between them. Or the English word book, German Buch, the English word breast, German Brust, the English word brown, German Braun, etc. They all begin with B's. Notice, however, that with the English words for day and dead, the German words begin with T, Tag and Tot. There is a regular correspondence between T in German and D in English when they are the first letter of the word. And so the similarities between these words and many other similarities between languages have led linguists to suggest that these were once a single language, and that over time in different areas the languages changed, the sounds changed, and what were once the same gradually became dialects, and those dialects gradually became separate languages. The same pattern can be said to have occurred with what was perhaps originally one language, Sanskrit, that gradually developed into the modern Hindi, Bengali, Oriya, Assamese, Marathi, and so on. And the same with the Thai languages, that what was originally a single language gradually diversified into becoming Tai Ahom, Tai Pake, Shan, Bangkok Thai, and so on. We'll come back to that. When we compare an even larger group of languages, we also see similarities. And scholars have suggested that all of these languages, Old English, English, Gothic, which was the ancestor, an earlier form of German, what are now German languages, Latin, which is the ancestor of French and Spanish and Portuguese and Italian, Sanskrit, which we've spoken about before, and Iranian, which has developed over time into the Farsi language of Iran, that these were all a single common language. So look at the words for mother: modor in Old English, mother in English, modir in Gothic, mater in Latin, matar in Sanskrit, etc. These obviously are related to each other. And over on the left-hand side, there is what is known as the proto-form. Now, there's a bit of complicated code going on there with the capital H's, and I'm not going to talk about that today, except to say that what this means is that we can reconstruct an original form and then explain all the sound changes that led to the forms that we see in all the languages that are present there. We call those daughter languages. Okay, so let's take a look at the Thai languages. For many years, scholars have been comparing the different Thai languages spoken in Thailand, in Laos, in Burma, in Vietnam, in China, and in India. And they've noticed many similarities. And by comparing all of these languages, came to see that there was a single group of languages which is now usually referred to as Southwestern Thai. So the names that were given to these groupings were related to where they occurred in connection with the original Thai homeland believed to be in the southwest of China. And this Southwestern Thai includes Bangkok Thai, it includes Lao, it includes Shan and all of Shan's varieties, and there are many different Shan varieties in Myanmar, and it includes the Thai languages of Northeast India, Tai Ahom, Tai Pake, Tai Ai Tuan, Tai Kham Yang, Tai Kham Ti. And I haven't added Tai Trung here because the Trung people today speak a form of Singpo with many Thai words mixed in. But back in the past, when some of the ancestors of the current Trung people were speakers of Tai languages, they too would have spoken a language of this group. And so on Wikipedia, we can find a nice map, which has been there for a long time, showing where Tai languages are to be found. And the biggest groups are the yellow group, which is the so-called Northern Tai, the red group, which is the Central Tai, and you see how those people are mostly found in Southwest China and across the border in Vietnam, and then the orange group, the Southwestern Tai, who have spread through a much larger area. The other small colors there, the Gra, the Kam Sui, the Be, and the Hlai, refer to smaller groups of languages that are more distantly related to Tai, and I won't be speaking any more about them today. But we will talk about the Northern Tai, Central Tai, and Southwestern Tai a little bit. Okay, so what scholars have done over the years is to study very closely all the information available about these languages. And in 1977, the Chinese scholar Fang Guili, who passed away in 1987, but who did have access to the dictionary that was made by G.C. Burua in 1920, the Ahom Assamese English Dictionary, and he published a Handbook of Comparative Tai. So what he tried to do was to look at all the information that could be found about all the different Tai languages and come up with a suggestion as to what the original form was. And this original form or proto-form we write with a star at the beginning. So what did he find? I'm just going to talk about two sounds that he found could be suggested for the original Tai language at a much earlier phase, and this is P and F. Now, in most modern Tai languages in Northeast India, there is today no difference between P and F. Some words, if you say pake or fake, you won't make any meaning difference. We say that these have merged, mostly to a P-like sound. Okay, so, but according to the work that Li did, by comparing groups of words, you would find that these two were different sounds in the proto-language. And he gave examples from three languages: Siamese, that's Bangkok Tai, representing the Southwestern Tai, Lungto and Bo'ai, which represent the Central and the Northern Tai groups. Okay, so let's have a look at the information that he got. So what he said was that this original Tai or proto-Tai sound P, that's the aspirated P as we call it, is to be found in all of the Southwestern and Central Tai dialects. And this is found in words like bamboo, to roll, the classifier for flat objects, hot or pungent, that's the word for, like chili taste, or the number 8 down the bottom, to be wrong or incorrect. That these will always have a P initial in the language varieties spoken in the Southwestern and indeed in the Central Tai, but in the Northern Tai they become P. They become the unaspirated P sound. And you can see the correspondent. In the first column, they're always PH. Second column, they're always PH. Third column, they're always P. And then he had a look at those which were proposed to have had originally an initial F sound. And he said that in the Southwestern languages, of which Siamese was the example, words like lid, wall, a kind of turtle, the palm of the hand, cloud, that these words, which is the sky word, that these words were always F in Siamese, but he made the note that in Shan and Ahom, they are represented by the PH, the same sound as we saw in the previous group. And notice that in Lung Chao, which is Central Tai, they also begin with PH. So for this particular set of two sounds, the Tai variety spoken in Shan state and also in Assam, the Tai Kamti, Tai Pake, Tai Aiton, and also the Tai Ahom followed the central Tai pattern. Now, the message that I want to give you from all of this is that we can understand the history of language by comparing these words. Now, if we were to look in Tai Ahom manuscripts and find a different symbol regularly written for this group of words, the ones which are shown with initial F, from this group of words, the ones which are shown with initial PH, then we could conclude that this was a representation of a stage in the history of the language. Okay, I now want to shift and play a recording that Poppy Gogoi made this afternoon so that we can hear about her recent research on this topic.
Interpretation of the sound system of a language through written data. Written text spanning over a considerable period of time provide evidence of the historical changes that the language underwent in due course of time. For example, NIGHT night versus KNIGHT night in English are spelled with two different initial consonants, giving two different meanings, but their initial consonant sounds are the same. This is an indication that both these two words had different initial consonant sounds in the past, which have merged into one sound, no, as pronounced in the present time. However, written data must be carefully analyzed to avoid any misleading interpretation of the language, as has been in the case of Ahom. Most of the studies in Ahom, namely Dwangtip 2012, Lurtum Sai 2004, assume a one-to-one correlation between the sounds and letters. So, how do we analyze written data? The best possible answer would be to do a detailed graphemic analysis of the script first, and then move on to the description of the sound system of the language. Now, what is a graphemic analysis? A graphemic analysis is similar to a phonemic analysis. The graphs were established as distinct graphemes by comparison with the contrastive minimal pairs. For example, in Ahom, P and P can be identified as two distinct graphemes, having the contrastive minimal pairs like P meaning year and P meaning spirit. Again, Pit meaning tap and Pit meaning wrong. These minimal pairs establish that P and P are two distinct graphemes in Ahom. Following the discrepancies discussed in Shorto in the study of a script, the graphs were also analyzed for any kind of allography or homography. Graphs which occurred interchangeably for the same word were considered as allographs. Here I would like to give an example from Ahom. The graphs M and the graph M always occurring in the initial position and the graph always occurring in the final position show that they are allographs of the same grapheme occurring in the complementary distribution. Again, if the same graph was used to realize more than one phonemic realization, it was considered for homography. Now, correspondence of the Ahom graphs to the Proto-Southwestern Tai. Once the graphemic analysis was done, these graphs can be compared with Proto-Southwestern Tai phonemes to have an idea of the sound system. Many sets of graphs, it was seen that many sets of graphs correspond to multiple phonemes on Proto-Southwestern Tai, indicating that Ahom had likely gone through a number of sound changes before its script came into existence. The correspondence of the Ahom graphemes to the reconstructions of the Proto-Southwestern Tai showed their relation to the Proto-Southwestern Tai phonemes. Lee 1997 was taken as a model for the correspondences. Now here is a table showing the Ahom letter correspondences to Proto-Southwestern aspirated voiceless stops. Here we see that the proto-forms for p, that is bilabial aspirated p, labiodental f, and v, all are represented with the same graph in Ahom. Here, I have made a comparison in 8 different manuscripts, and we see a regular pattern in all the 8 different manuscripts that words corresponding to all these 3 different protophonemes are represented by the same graph per in Ahom. Now moving on to the next set, th and k, we again see that especially in the set for k, for the graph kh, 3 different protophonemes are represented by the same graph. So here we can see a merger in the protophonemes happening in Ahom. So summarizing the tables, we see that the one-to-many correspondences can be interpreted as results of phonemic mergers rather than homography. We see that the Proto-Southwestern Tai voiced fricatives had become devoiced and merged with their voiceless counterparts. Secondly, the fricatives f and h were absent from Ahom because they had already merged with the protophonemes p and k respectively before the script was adopted in Ahom. Why? Because if Ahom had f and h, they would have invented new symbols to encode these 2 sounds similar to the graphs d and b, which were invented just for Ahom as they were not taken from the Burmese or the Mon scripts. Further, the Shan script used in a 15th century Chinese scroll predating any surviving Ahom writing has an F, which is a clearly modified form of the per graph. This can be seen in Daniel's 2012. So if Ahom actually had an F in their sound system, it is not clear why they would have ignored this Shan innovated letter. Thus, it can be concluded that the fricative F is merged with the voiceless aspirated stop PH. Thank you.
Thank you, Poppy. So I'm going to stop this discussion here. The issue of the history of languages is a very complicated and interesting one, and something which, which requires a lot of study. I guess the final point to make here is that we can do this kind of historical study with any different group of languages. So once we, for example, have got really good word lists for all the different varieties of Tangsa and Nokte and Wancho, we can compare them and start to talk about the history of those languages. This is some work which is ongoing with myself and my former PhD student, Dr. Kellen Parker Van Dam, that some of you will know. He is working now in Switzerland and doing this kind of work. But this can also be very important in understanding where, for example, these Tai Ahom manuscripts fit in the story of the history of that language. Because Tai Ahom is an old language, has a history of 600 years from the time of Sukapa up to the time of the end of the Ahom kingdom, and that language will have changed during that time. But as Poppy has pointed out, from what we have been able to study of the manuscripts for which we have got reliable word-by-word translations that allow us to know which word means which thing, at this stage, it seems as if the traditional group of consonants does represent the sounds of that language. Okay, so I'm going to stop this recording now and also stop the screen sharing and stop this Zoom meeting and this direct Facebook video. And we can chat a little bit in the Facebook chat if people have questions.